Gute Woche, friedliche Woche. Um, I wanted to share a few stories about Betzal Fleischman, who just passed away early Friday morning. Betzal Fleischman was a very unique chassid, and he was unique in many, many ways. And although he was a not originally born religious, but in my experience, Betzal was a chassid that reminds me a lot of the great Hasidim that with all of us idolize. We speak about with such reverence, like Mendel Futerfas and Berker, people um, who thought only about Hashem's desire of having a home in this world, and didn't think more anything about their own personal agendas. It says if someone passes away on a Friday, it's a good sign for the neshama, because the neshama is usually, before going to heaven, the neshama needs to be judged and to see which place in heaven is going to be in. But on a Friday, the heavenly court convenes early. They end early because Shabbos is coming, and so therefore they're not so careful in judgment on Friday, and they let the neshama, let the souls more easily into heaven. And once the soul is allowed into a good spot in heaven, so the soul is already allowed to stay there. So Betzalel, he suffered a lot in this world, and he was such a unique chassid. So I'm sure he's already listening to chassidus in Gan Eden. Betzalel um, has a very, very colorful life, and I wish I would have written down more things that Betzalel shared with me. In general, the previous Rebbe writes at length about the great value of writing things down, and how important it is to write things down that you hear from Chassidim, and how impactful it is to put things down on paper. As the Alter Rebbe said, you should acquire a friend. The Alter Rebbe said it means Kane, the pen should be your friend. When you write something down, you're able to internalize it. Previous Rebbe once shared how he began writing things down. He shared how he had a teacher whose name was Rabbi Skabla, who lived on a street called Petersburg Street. He was given a house by his father-in-law, Pesach, and he merited to his father-in-law was someone very connected to the Mittler Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek, and so he lived on Petersburg Street. It was a big street, a wide street. It was called by the capital city probably because it was the biggest street in that area. But the previous Rebbe said the jokers would say the reason why it's called Petersburg Street is because Petersburg, that street led to the nearby city of Durban-Missile. And from Durban-Missile, you could take a train to Petersburg. So they call it Petersburg Street. That was just a joke. But anyways, the previous Rebbe said that he once visited his teacher. He was very young, and it was actually the month of El. It was the 3rd of El, I think, the 9th of El, Parshas Kiseitze. And he goes in. He said his teacher's house was surrounded by mud, and besides mud, there was also goats there. And it was very, very, very dirty. But the previous Rebbe said, if you brave the dirt and the mud and the goats, and you also were able to climb up the high step that led into his home, you would discover his home to be a home that was very, very nicely arranged. Right, and according to their financial means, they had nice, clean furniture, and the house was painted well. So previous Rebbe said that his teacher had summoned him to come to his home, and he showed him various notebooks of his writing, and he picked up one of the books of his writing, showed the previous Rebbe, and he says to him that he always writes things down. He does this because of the following story, which is the first story that he wrote in his one of his notebooks. He let the previous Rebbe gave the previous Rebbe permission to only copy down that story of all of his many books of stories. He said that um, this notebook is as thick as the Torah or a Siddur. It's a very thick notebook because he writes everything down. And he told him how he began writing things down. And he writes the exact date of when this happened. And the previous Rebbe in general, when he wrote down his story, he wrote down all the dates and the exact details of when his teacher. In this story too, he writes down where he was and what how old he was, and what his teacher wrote down and the exact date his teacher wrote it down. So the previous Rebbe said in the first entry, the diary of his teacher, and this in Kabbalah, he writes, "I am Nissen, the son of Rabbi Yamin, Binyamin's Kabbalah." His father was also a teacher, and he said that when I was 15 years old, I was once outside the courtyard of the Tzemach Tzedek, and I saw how the Tzemach Tzedek is talking to his youngest son, who later succeeded him, the Reb Marash, and he's telling his son how when the Alter Rebbe came to Mizrich, the Alter Rebbe told us the Tzemach Tzedek, he wrote down everything that he heard from Zitcha Magid, but not only the things he heard from Zitcha Magid, but even things that he heard from people in Mizrich, the Hasidim in Mizrich, he wrote everything down on paper. And so said the Alter Rebbe to the Tzemach Tzedek, that this is what he did, and Tzemach Tzedek learned this also from the Alter Rebbe from his youngest age. He was able to write things down, and so the previous Rebbe also, when he read this from his teacher, he was told by his teacher, and listen, you should also write everything down you hear from your father, write it down in detail. And when your father tells you a story and he makes a comment on the story, write the comment down. And because of Reb Nissen, we have all the wealthy writings of the previous Rebbe describing the all of the lives of all of our Rebbes. Interesting continuation to this. The previous Rebbe began describing about how he learned how to write, how his parents went away to a health resort in Yalta, and how his grandmother, Rebbetzin Rivka, the wife of Marash, how she encouraged the previous Rebbe to write them a um, a note, a letter, and how she got someone to teach the previous Rebbe how to write. There was a man in Lubavitch who was a writer, and he taught the previous Rebbe how to improve his handwriting. And it was very important to her and to the Rebbeim to have a nice handwriting. That's the previous Rebbe began writing. So anyway, so my point is that when you hear something from a chassid, you're supposed to not just hear it, but you're supposed to write it down and to read, and that way to retain it. But unfortunately, I didn't write things down. I heard from Rabbi Tzal, so I'm just relying on some memories, which are details are a little off. And these are the stories Batzal shared with me, important stories in his life. He said he was very enamored in his. He was what was called the hog farm, which was very involved in creating Woodstock. He was one of the people there that fed the hundreds of thousands that went to Woodstock. And in continuation to Woodstock, he also spent a lot of time with the Indians. And he was very enamored with the Sufis, and he wanted to join the Sufis. And he met one of the gurus of this Muslim tribe, that Muslim Sufis, that he met with this guru, and the guru said to Pesach Batzalel that your soul is purely Jewish. You have a lofty, purely Jewish soul, and therefore we can accept you to the Sufis because you need to be Jewish. And Shuvah sent him in a direction of exploration of his Jewish identity, and that led Rabbi Batzalel to Berkeley, to Rabbi Ferris, and many others along the journey of his exploring Judaism, and in such a sincere and authentic way. Rabbi Tzal, this is a classic story of Rabbi Tzal. Rabbi Tzal once visited Crown Heights and visited the Rebbe, and there was one elderly man. I don't remember his name, But I do remember that he is Googleable because Ritzal told me about him, and I Googled him at once. And someone wrote a documentary about Hasidim, in a very early documentary, years and years ago. Became famous for his documentary. And this man was living in Crown Heights, and he was elderly, and he needed someone to take care of him. So when Betzalel went to his home, and they both remember, and he remembered how he knew this man from years and years before. There was another man who was assigned, designated to take care of him. But the guy who was meant to take care of him told Rabbi Tzal, "I need to go. Can you take over a couple hours?" He took over, but the man wasn't honest with him, and he left town. So it wasn't taking over for a couple of hours; it was taking over completely. But Betzal was a man who lived with divine providence. He lived with the teaching of the Baal Shem that everything's for a reason. That Hashem has guided him to be with this man, and he has to take care of him. And so Betzal spent years with this man. He spent years and years with this man, taking care of him, because someone left and needed him to take care of him. So that's his mission. Took care of him. Took care of this elderly man. This elderly man apparently had some unique attention from the Rebbe. Whenever Rebbe Tzal went by the Rebbe would start a conversation with him, which is very unusual. And they would ask him, "How is this man doing?" The Rebbe Tzal um, shared how this elderly man was at one point became paralyzed completely. He couldn't move anything except for his eyes. Nothing. Couldn't move anything at all. And he went to the Rebbe, and he always get $1 from the Rebbe for this man. Parenthetically, Rabbi Groner, the Rebbe's secretary, said once to Betzalel, "Why do you always take the Rebbe's time and talk to the Rebbe?" And Rabbi Betzalel responded, "Rabbi Groner, have you ever seen me initiate a conversation with the Rebbe?" In other words, whenever he came by the Rebbe himself took interest in Betzalel, took interest in this old man he was taking care of, and he never once used had the temerity or the chutzpah, if you will, to take the Rebbe's time for anything. It was just the Rebbe's initiative. Anyways, one time Betzalel said whenever he got $1 from the Rebbe for this man, you put the dollar on his hand, put it on his hand or in his hand, then you put it into charity. But one time he went by dollars, and Rebbe said to Betzalel to give the tzedakah to this elderly man, so he should give it to tzedakah. I don't know the exact words Rebbe used, but it was different to the usual words Rebbe used. And therefore, instead of Betzalel putting it on his hand or under his hand, Betzalel put the dollar between the fingers of this man, and a miracle happened. The miracle was the man just snapped he just put his fingers together, which was impossible. He could not move anything of his body. But miraculously, when after the Rebbe's words, give it to him, put it in his hands, something like, I think those were the words. He closed his fingers together, and Rebbe Tzal ran back to 770 and tell the Rebbe he took the dollar. And the Rebbe acknowledged with a big smile at the appreciating hearing the good news. So most recently, just to give you an insight of Betzalel, Betzalel would have put on tefillin. Rashi made a time tefillin every morning before the time of Shema. Officially, although it says in the Mishnah, if you say Shema without wearing tefillin, it's like saying a lie, because the Shema says to put on tefillin. So if you're saying Shema, you're not putting on tefillin, it's sort of like a lie. You're not being honest. However, although that's what it says, the interpretation of the Mishnah by most commentaries is that it's sufficient that you put on tefillin at some time during the day. It's only considered a lie if you don't put on tefillin at all. But if you put on tefillin at some point, that's already considered honesty. It's already considered that it's already considered enough to satisfy that requirement of being honest. And as it says in the Shema, to put on tefillin, you put on tefillin at least one time during the day. You don't have to put on tefillin while you say Shema in the morning, the first time. You put on tefillin anyways later on when we pray. So if you're praying later, after the time of Shema, you don't have to put on tefillin earlier before the time of Shema. That's the general consensus. However, there are many Hasidim who put on tefillin earlier on. It's a hiddur mitzvah. It's considered a more beautiful way to perform the mitzvah of Shema, to put on tefillin when you say Shema, even the first time, even before you pray. And when you say Shema earlier on, put on film then. But we put on two pairs of film. We put on Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. But Tzal shared with me how we started putting on film in the morning, both Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam, and he says Shema on both of them. So I told Betzalel, I know that there was a chassid whose name was Rebbe Chaim. He was a very he was way up there, the OGs, people who really, one of the greatest chassidim. And he put on four pairs of tefillin. Putting on four pairs of tefillin was not something that everyone does. Only someone who had a very, very pure mind and pure heart could do this. And Rebbe Chaim had a similar custom. And he would put on all four pairs of tefillin also before the time, in addition to putting them on during the time of prayer, he put on all four pairs of tefillin on before the time of Shema. However, when Rebbe told the Rebbe that this is what he does, the Rebbe said to him, "Do you enjoy this?" He said, "Yes." I said, "If you enjoy this, you can continue." And it sounded like to me, I told Betzalel that that you don't have to do it this way. Just if he liked doing it that way. So Rebbe told me he could, but it doesn't sound like that was like encouraging him to do it. But it was very interesting how Betzalel took this. Betzalel was like, "Oh," so Rebbe said, "If he enjoys it, he can continue. I enjoy this." So it just shows like the joy, what where his heart was, where his enjoyment was. Most of us would think it's such a tircha, such a trouble to go put on four pairs of tefillin again and again, and then take them off and then start put them on again. But that was he considered enjoyment. Every Friday night when when the chazan, when the minyan would get up to l'chadodi, in many Chabad synagogues, the whole community dances around the bima. But for Betzalel, there's no difference between Friday night on a regular Shabbos and Simchas Torah. Every week was Simchas Torah. No matter what was going on, he had the full Simcha. And let me say, it's not just Friday night in Shul. It was every time you visited Betzalel, every time, wherever you were, it was always Simchas Torah. When I visited him in the hospital, it was Simchas Torah. Let's sing a song. Let's celebrate. Let's dance. In fact, when I visited him a few weeks ago, we were dancing and singing, and one of the nurses had to come in and say, "Betzalel, you're not allowed to. Your foot, you can't do this. You have to relax." But I told the nurse that one of the first things they teach us in Hasidic school is how to dance when you're sitting. Anyways, so Rabbi Tzalel, for him, it was always Simchas Torah. So much so that last time I saw him, I just felt I had to see him this week. And I saw him on early Wednesday morning, 3:30 a.m. And I asked him 4:30 a.m. I asked him if he wants to hear a song. He was responsive. He couldn't speak, and it seemed like he did want to hear a song. So I sang a song that he likes. Rebbe's father's niggin. Although Betzal couldn't move, like the story I said before, he could move his eyes, move his feet a little bit, move his hands a little bit. Betzalel, with his eyes, you could see that part of the song that he liked, the part of the song was, did it, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. He was into it. You could see there was some movement, some recognition. He couldn't move anything. He was too weak, but he was not too weak. There's a strength, there's a fire that he had. They say that to be a lion, you have to be born in the jungle. Saul had a very jungle-like upbringing, coming from Woodstock and the Sufis, but that's what created this lion of a chassid, of Betzal Fleischman. So Betzalel spent a lot of time every day davening. He would spend a lot of time preparing for davening itself, but he was never too busy to respond to anyone. He was never too preoccupied not to give a Jew a hug and a kiss. You met Betzalel, it meant you're going to get a hug, it meant you're going to get a kiss. He just exuded love and faith in Hashem in such a honest, down-to-earth way. Down to earth, perhaps sometimes you might say in a sacrilegious way. And I went to his funeral this past Friday. I saw another gentleman there, and he says to me, walking past all the monuments, past all the graves, he says, "Let's wake everybody up." I was like, "Wow, that's something Betzalel would say." He says, "Yes, that's where I heard it from. That's how Betzalel would speak." Like for him, the miracle, the resurrection of the dead, the coming Mashiach, is at his fingertips. So he spoke about such frank, down-to-earth honesty, and so real, like like the air we breathe. So those are just a few stories of Batal. It's Hashem, God willing, I'll share some more another time. Tonight, I wanted to share with you a the origin of the custom that we have to say 3 chapters of Tehillim every day. The origin of this comes from a um, a note of the previous Rebbe, who writes in detail a fascinating um, account of a memory that he had from years and years before. The previous Rebbe writes that he listened to the blowing of the shofar of his father in the early morning of the first day of Elul, and how this shofar blowing affected him very deeply. And this voice of the shofar reminded him how the first day of Elul announces that this is the day that Moses went up to Mount Sinai, and at that time of mercy, and Hashem, the gates of mercy are opened. And the previous Rebbe said that his father told him that just like when things grow in the ground, they don't grow by themselves. They have to. There first has to be plowing and planting, and so too said the Rebbe Rashab to the previous Rebbe that just like all of these things have to be done to the ground, the hoeing and weeding and pruning and removing the fruits that are rotting, that are full of worms, and the rain um, has a much stronger effect when the field is plowed than if the field is only if the field is plowed and plowed well does the grain do something. And even Yitzchak was a godly man. The Torah says about Yitzchak planted seeds and then they grew. When Hashem gave him this tremendous success, he had to first plant the seeds. So the Rebbe Rashab told the previous Rebbe, the physical and the spiritual are parallel. They're connected. Just like this is true in the physical soil, that its expression, all kinds of growth, from the simplest kind of vegetation to the best kind of vegetation, it depends on plowing and planting, and you can only plant after you've plowed well. So too is true in regards to the planting and growing in the Jew who is called God's desirable land. It depends on the plowing and the planting. And the Rebbe Rashab said, what is the strongest plow to till the soil of the human heart, of the Jewish heart? It is the book called The Path of Life from the Mitzvah Rebbe. That's what even the most hardest heart, the soil, the hardest soil of the heart, is plowed well by through this holy book of Derech Chaim. Within Chassidus itself, this is more of the Musar of Chassidus, more about more of a stronger, harder message. So the Rebbe Rashab spoke to previous Rebbe very briefly, and he was telling the previous Rebbe that day, in continuation to his discussion with him the day before, that although the gates of heaven are opened, but we need to make an effort on our own. As the acronym for the month of Elul is, I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. That we first have to approach our beloved. We have to take a step first. So, previously I was thinking about this. Meanwhile, the clouds the sky darkens, the clouds come, and it starts to rain, and it rains a torrential rain till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. All of a sudden, then the sun come out, and the previous step said I went to go walk in the garden. And as he's walking in the garden, he remembered something that happened 10 years before. On the first of Elul, how his father promised him that he would tell him a story. That's what the previous Rebbe remembered then. After the sun came out, he suddenly remembered something, a memory that he had 10 years before. In the year Tafresh Mem Tes, when the previous Rebbe was 9 years old, the first of Elul fell out on a Wednesday, and the previous Rebbe said, I came home from school to have lunch. I used to always have lunch at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I used to, as a child, 9 years old, I used to dance and move when I came home from school. And I like this time of these 2 hours of that he was off from school from 2 to 4, he was free from school. So he was more of an jovial dancing kind of state, and he especially because he knew that his teacher promised to tell them different stories, um, and so he was excited about hearing the stories. So since he was going to hear the story, he's also excited. Then in this time of he was off 9 years old, 2 to 4 break, but from school, he's home for lunch, and he's jumping around happy. But when he comes in, he saw the face of his father was very serious. He said, "I don't remember if my father ate lunch or not, but I do remember his face was very serious, and he did not eat with us, that's for sure. And he said to the previous Rebbe that he should eat quickly, and then he should come into the Rebbe Rashab. He wants to speak to him." He thought that perhaps the Rebbe Rashab wants to talk to him about something in learning, but it was very interesting to him because it was very unusual for the Rebbe Rashab to disturb him during his time off of school. And so he quickly finished eating and he went into the room of the Rebbe Rashab. When he came into the Rebbe Rashab's room, he saw that Rebbe Rashab was sitting by a table between these two windows in the eastern side of the room, and that he wasn't sitting by the other table where you used as a desk to write things. He was sitting at another table between two windows, and he was saying Tehillim, and he saw how his eyes were wet from crying, and his eye and his eyelashes were wet. And when the previous Rebbe walked in, he stood for a little while at the threshold of the entrance of the room until his father finished saying that chapter of Tehillim that he was up to. The Rebbe Rashab closed the Tehillim and he put a handkerchief inside the book as a sign to remember what he was up to. And then he turned to the previous Rebbe with a holy sweetness. And he said to him, "In the year Taf Reish Chav Tes, when I was 9 years old, there was the first of all that year was on Shabbos, and right after Shabbos, my father called me, and my father told me, the Rebbe Marash, in other words, told the Rebbe Rashab, when the Rebbe Rashab was 9 years old, said the Rebbe Marash to him that when I was 9 years old, meaning when the Rebbe Marash was 9 years old, when my father came home, meaning that Tzemach Tzedek came home from Petersburg, he called me in the month of El, and he said to me this: when I went to visit Petersburg, the Tzemach Tzedek went to visit Petersburg because there were various decrees that the government was making against the Jewish people, and the Tzemach Tzedek went there to discuss various questions the government had about Jewish practices, and they summoned the leader of the Hasidic movement, Tzemach Tzedek, and they summoned the leader of the Litvisha movement, and so there's many meetings Tzemach Tzedek had in Petersburg. So when I went to visit Petersburg, said the Tzemach Tzedek there, Marash, when he was 9 years old, I asked your brother and you that you should say every day Psalms, Tehillim, so Hashem should have mercy and I should be successful in my journey, my journey for the honor of Hashem, for the sake of the revealed Torah, for the sake of the hidden Torah, and for the sake of the benefit of the Jewish people. So officially, the meeting was supposed to take 9 days, a week, not more than 10 days, but it ended up being 8 weeks. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, when I was 9 years old, my father told me, when Tzemach Tzedek said Tzemach Tzedek said, my grandfather told me that that I heard from my teachers in the Mizitcha Magid, who heard from his teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, who heard from his famous teacher. The famous teacher of the Baal Shem Tov means the Achia Shileni. Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Navi, was taught by Achia Shileni, And the Baal Shem Tov was also taught by the same teacher of Elijah the prophet, Achia Shalin. So that Tzemach Tzedek said, my grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, called me when I was 9 years old and told me that he heard from the Maggid, who heard from Baal Shem Tov, who he heard from Achia Shileni, that from the second day of Rosh Chodesh Elul until Yom Kippur, we should say every day Tehillim. At some point during the day, say 3 chapters of Tehillim. And in Yom Kippur, we should say 36 chapters. 9 before Kol Nidre, 9 before going to sleep, 9 after Musaf, 9 after Ne'ilah. And whoever did not start on the second day of Elul should start whatever day he remembers, whatever day he discovers this, and then he should go back and say the Tehillim that he missed. So now, the Rebbe Rashab told the previous Rebbe, take a Tehillim and say the first 3 chapters, and say it like I told you, every day 3 chapters. And when you get older, said the Rebbe Rashab, the previous Rebbe, I will tell you what I want to tell you about this. So now this is 10 years later. This is all in the previous Rebbe's diary. 10 years later, he was 9 years old, like his father and his grandfather, his great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, all were when they heard this message. And now this is 10 years later, and he hasn't ever asked his father for what was the rest of the story. He said, do you want to tell me the rest of the story at some point? He never asked his father what the rest of the story was. So, he said 10 years passed. Oh, hold on 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. So the previous episode said, I was surprised at myself that I never asked my father, what was the thing that you wanted to tell me? You said you wanted to tell me something. What was the thing that you wanted to tell me? I never asked it. And so I just remembered the previous Rebbe said, on the 18th of Elul, at 9 o'clock at night, I remember what my father told me 10 years before. And because it was raining, the previous Rebbe said, my father didn't go out for a walk as we would. He just sat and he said a discourse of Chassidus, and as he would in every 18th of El, the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, the birthday of the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab would say a discourse. So after that discourse, the previous Rebbe said, I remember now the promise that he told me. He wanted to tell me a story about this, a story about the custom of saying 3 chapters of Tehillim. So after the Rebbe Rashab finished the discourse, the previous Rebbe was thinking, I want to ask my father now to tell me the rest of the story. So he went to the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe Rashab could see in his face he wanted to say something. The Rebbe Rashab said to him, what do you want to say? Whatever, don't be embarrassed. I'll tell you. Ask and I'll tell you. So I told the Rebbe Rashab, said the previous Rebbe, that I remember in the second of El that you told me to say Tehillim according to the order of the Baal Shem Tov, 3 chapters of Tehillim every day, and you also told me that you're going to tell me a story about this, and I when I get older, and I never heard the story. So the previous Rebbe told the Rebbe Rashab, from then, when I was 9 years old till today, I don't know how I remember this promise until today. And since I remembered it now, I decided that I'm going to ask the Rebbe Rashab to fulfill his promise. And then I forgot again. And a few days passed from the 1st of El, and each time I remember and I forget. Now it's the 18th of El, and now I remembered it again. In other words, from the 1st of El until the 18th of El, I kept on remembering and forgetting. So the Rebbe Rashab told the previous Rebbe, from the moment that I started to tell you stories, I was waiting that you would ask me about the story, because my father, Reb Marash, didn't tell me the story until I asked him to tell the story. In the year Tafresh Lamed Zayin, On Friday, Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshas told us, I was standing in the small synagogue by the table of the Rebbe Marash, and I was waiting for the Rebbe Marash to come out of his room and to say a discourse of Chassidus. And then I remembered, and it said the Rebbe Shach the previous Rebbe, then I remembered that he told me 10 years before, or 8 years before, Tafish Chavtes, that he told me that when I get older, he will tell me a story about this Tillim. Or it's he, just like the previous Rebbe forgot, so to his father also forgot that his father, the Marash, told the Rebbe Rashab that he would tell him a story about the Tillim. And I decided, said the Rebbe Rashab to the Rebbe Marash, that when I go to visit my father, I will ask him about it. But then I forgot again. Then I remembered again. I forgot again. It was only until the second day of Hanukkah that on a Tuesday that I remembered, and I asked him. The Rebbe Marash looked at the Rebbe Rashab, and he's looking with a very deep look. A look that you don't forget, said the previous Rebbe, a look that makes you tremble. And he said, in the year Tafresh Ches, in the month of Tishrei, my father, Tzemach Tzedek, was very bitter. Even the times of the Yontif, the holiday times, were also very serious. Something that frightened everyone. But no one asked him what the meaning of his seriousness was. But the day after Sukkot, the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek called the Rebbe Mash's brother, Baruch Shalom, and he told him that every day, early morning, not later than 4 o'clock in the morning, they should gather 10 Jews together and say the whole Tillim. Until you tell them to stop, every day till at 4 o'clock, earlier than 4 in the morning, they should say the whole Tillim. And no one should know about it. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek told the Marash, told the Rebbe Baruch Shalom, that they should say every day the whole Tillim early in the morning. So this went on from the 25th of Tishrei until Friday, Parshas Vayishlach. It went on for 53 days. So every single day, at 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 3:30, there was a minion that gathered secretly to say the whole Tillim. Reb Chaim Doiver, who worked as an attendant of the Tzemach Tzedek, shared that while they were saying Tehillim, the Tzemach Tzedek was also saying Tehillim. How much he said and what the order he said, no one knew, but he was also saying Tehillim. And also they noticed that when he was saying Tehillim, he also gave charity while he was saying Tehillim. He would put gold, copper, and silver coins in a pushka in some order that he had while he was saying Tehillim. So the Rebbe Ramash said that my brothers, they thought that since the year Tafresh Ches, when the story happened, was a year that there were 2 Adars, and in general, it's known that the year that 2 Adars, we need more mercy from Hashem in that kind of year, which parenthetically, the Rebbe said that in our time where we're now, already past that stage of that time being a time of judgment, even if it's 2 Adars, not a time of judgment. And so, but they thought that because there's a tradition from the Mizitcher Maggid and Baal Shem Tov that kind of year needs more mercy from Hashem, that's the reason why there's need for them to say Tillim, and also because that year was a year that was a case. One of the times that it is said that would be the auspicious time for Mashiach to come was the year Tafresh Ches, which that kind of a year also needs more mercy from Hashem. So on that Friday, a Parshas Vayishlach, after them saying Tillim for 53 days in a row, the whole Tillim 53 times, the Tzemach Tzedek called Baruch Shalom, his oldest son, and he told him that he is not commanding them to continue saying Tillim anymore. They could continue saying Tillim if they want to, but he's not commanding them to say Tillim anymore. And that year, the Tzemach Tzedek was very joyous, and he said Chassidus 3 times, 3 from Maimarim, and the Likutei Torah was printed that year, and Tzemach Tzedek was very happy when it was printed on Hanukkah. And on the anniversary of the Alter Rebbe's passing, Chavdal Tevis, the Tzemach Tzedek was the chazan for all 3 prayers, and everyone was invited. All the family members were invited to the table of Tzemach Tzedek. So while they were eating at the meal with the Tzemach Tzedek was in a very state of dveik, a state of spiritual rapture. And they sang this famous nigun, the Alter Rebbe, the nigun which has 4 parts, the famous song which is known that's able to open the gates of mercy. So the Tzemach Tzedek said when they finished singing, he said, on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, I saw that there's a great decree against the Jewish people, and especially a decree against those who are studying Torah. I had a lot of pain because of this. I also couldn't see my grandfather, the Alter Rebbe. I did all that I could, but it didn't help. I saw my father-in-law, the Mittler Rebbe, and he told me that the decree is a really difficult decree. However, he says the decree hasn't yet been sealed, and we have to make an effort to ask for mercy from Hashem, but don't publicize it, because publicizing it will ruin things. So, on Simchas Torah, that year, when they sang the nigun of the Alter Rebbe, then, before they concluded the after blessing, the Rebbe, that Tzemach Tzedek said at that time, at the conclusion of Simchas Torah, I saw the Alter Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe told me, this is the Tzemach Tzedek is saying, on Yutis Kislev, that year, he's sharing what happened at the end of Simchas Torah. He said, I saw my grandfather trying to see him. After Alter Rebbe's passing, he still was able to see him. But then he was finally able to see his grandfather. And the Alter Rebbe said to Tzemach Tzedek that the halacha is that when you say the Birchas Hamazon, when you bench, you're supposed to use a cup, and the cup has to be lifted off the table a few inches, a tefach. So that Tzemach Tzedek, the Alter Rebbe told Tzemach Tzedek, the cup of blessing of King David is the book of Tehillim. This book of Tehillim, this cup of blessing of King David, the book of Tehillim, it lifts us up a tefach. It lifts us up this measure of a few inches and nullifies all decrees against the Jewish people. It lifts us up. Why a tefach? Why that amount of inches? That's discussed in Chassidus what that means, but it lifts us up and nullifies all decrees against the Jewish people. The cup of blessing, the book of Tehillim, lifts us up and destroys all the decrees against the Jewish people. The Alter Rebbe told Tzemach Tzedek, you should establish that people should say secretly every day in the early morning, not later than 4 o'clock in the morning, the whole book of Tehillim for 53 days. And the decree will be erased. Then the Tzemach Tzedek concluded and said these words, if you would know, said Tzemach Tzedek, the power of the verses of Tehillim and their effect in the highest of heavens, you would say them all the time. You should know, said Tzemach Tzedek, that the Psalms of Tehillim break through all boundaries. They ascend higher and higher without any interruption, and they prostrate themselves before the Master of the world, and they accomplish with kindness and mercy an achievement. That's the story that the previous Rebbe was waiting to hear from his father for 10 years, that the Rebbe Marash was waiting to hear from his father for 8 years, about the meaning of the instruction of saying the 3 chapters of Tehillim every day in the month of Elul until Yom Kippur. Bottom line is that Baruch Hashem is a new week of Parshas Ki Seitzei. When the first verse of this week's Torah portion is, when you go out to war, you're above your enemies. Hashem promises a Jew that at the very outset of a battle, the Jew should know that Hashem is with him, above his enemies, and on the path of victory, the victory of the coming Mashiach. We should see this happen, Mekarev Mamish. A good tavach and a freilich tavach. It's happened, my friends. Tehillim makes it happen, and we're in this to win this, and we're at the threshold of redemption. Make sure to say these 3 chapters of Tehillim every day, and we should know that this is a time of redemption, and any moment we're going to be there. The previous Rebbe said that when a soldier goes out to war, he sings a song of victory. To sing the song of victory as we're approaching the coming Mashiach, to sing the song as Rebbe Tzalel, full of joy, full of song. That's the way to.